ticklish business any way you look at it. Come on, we'll stick together.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Ticklish Business, the podcast all about celebrating old Hollywood and the films, filmmakers, people we love. As always, I'm your host, Kristen Lopez, and this week we are going deep into the outer limits of space itself to celebrate the anniversary of 1956's Forbidden Planet. And to help us do that, I have a great guest, director, all-around awesome person, foremost collector of Forbidden Planet stuff. It is Bill Malone. Bill, how are you?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I get to talk to you, so I'm doing pretty dang good. Bill is awesome. We got to talk about Tales from the Crypt for my book that's coming out next year. If people listen to my episode that I did on House on Haunted Hill a long time ago, it's been a minute since I did that episode, but I talked about how much I love the remake, slightly more than the original. That's because I saw your version first, so, you know, Vincent was second place. But I'm excited to get to talk to you about Forbidden Planet. Before we do that, I'd love to remind everybody that our Patreon keeps the lights on, pays the bills at Ticklish Biz HQ, and gives you access to all sorts of cool stuff, including these episodes 48 hours early. I send out swag. I'm going to be doing a walking tour in LA for the TCM Classic Film Festival that patrons are going to hear about first. And it starts at just $1 at patreon.com/ticklishbiz. As always, I'd like to thank friends like David Floyd, Danny, Ali Moore, Sean Goudreau, Richard Silver, Peter Bryant, Jacob Howler, Peter Blitzstein, all of you who support the podcast with your time and your money. Thank you so much. If you're watching this on YouTube, an additional thank you, because we are starting to dive into video. If you aren't hanging out with us on YouTube, head over to youtube.com/the @ticklish business. If you're listening via podcast apps like Spotify or Apple Podcasts, we'd love a review. Leave us one as you're listening, because it helps get more eyeballs on the show. That's all the housekeeping. So we're going to talk about Forbidden Planet. This is the story of a starship crew in the 23rd century that ends up on the distant planet of Altair 4 and discover the survivor of a past ship played by Walter Pidgeon, who is living there with his daughter, played by Anne Francis. And there is all sorts of robots, aliens, Freudian imagery. It's a lot of film. I saw this, I don't even remember the first time I saw Forbidden Planet. It's been a while. I feel like it's always been part of my classic film education. And rewatching it this time, I was so impressed by how it has everything that I think we love about old Hollywood. The practical effects, the matte painting sets, that weird liminal threshold between fantasy and reality that makes classic films so fun. Bill, where did you get into Forbidden Planet? Where did you discover this movie? How did this come to you?
Well, I'm an old guy. I was a little kid, and I saw it when it first came out in the theaters. And I was like 9 years old when I saw it. And when the flying saucer flew overhead and Robby the Robot then stepped out of his car, I was hooked. I said, this is the greatest thing ever. So, from that point on, I was a huge fan of the movie. So,
well, I mean, I didn't realize, I had some friends that when I started my Tales from the Crypt project that had said, Bill Malone, he owns the original Robby the Robot. But in doing my research, I'd also read that you were kind of considered one of the foremost collectors of stuff from the film. How did that translate into collecting things from the movie?
Well, it actually kind of started by accident, because I'm originally from Michigan, and the idea of actually owning any original props was like completely alien to me. I was like, there's no way you'd ever get your hands on that stuff. Because the studio's attitude was always like, we got it, you want it, you can't have it. But what happened really was some friends brought over, I think it was a mask. It may have been from the original TV show Outer Limits. And I became aware of the fact that this stuff was actually available if you sought it out. And at the time I was working actually at a guitar shop, which was like in 1970 when MGM had their auction, and they basically took everything out of their storage and had it up for sale. And
Dumped it out and said, "Take
yeah,
it."
and I went to the auction, but there were only a few things from Forbidden Planet. Robby was not there. And I called him a few months later after the auction. And at this point, I was probably like 19 or 20 years old. And, I was poor, so I couldn't have bought anything anyway. But I asked him about Robby the Robot. I called a student and talked to somebody, and they said, yeah, we got him. We're going to hang on to him. And then some years later, I was working at a place called Don Post Studios and sculpting masks and so forth. And then we had to go over to MGM quite often for various things. And at one point, I became friends with a guy named, what was his name now? God, I can't, this is sad. Well, I'll think of it in a minute. Anyway, he was the head of construction over at MGM. And he told us that he had some old props that they were going to get rid of. And so I said, yeah, great. We were actually wanting props, some sci-fi props for a little project we were doing. And I shot a lot of pictures with the masks using real props and so forth for our catalog. And I went over there and he said, let's go up here. And it was on the main lot, but it was way in the back. And they had this like wooden shed. And it was like a 2-story tall shed. Underneath was like cars and things, but there's this rickety old staircase going up to this old wooden shed that looked like something out of a Western movie. And when we got up there, he opened the door, and I'm sure my mouth must have gone like down to the floor because there was like tons of props from Forbidden Planet. There was newer props, model submarines and things, and there was also the green wizard's machine from Wizard of Oz,
Wow.
and they were just getting rid of all of it, and they said it was going to get bulldozed. And
Ugh.
first thing I asked him about was the spaceship that was in the globe, the navigation center from Forbidden Planet. He said, "You're a day late, dollar short. We bulldozed it yesterday." So,
No.
but they still had all this stuff in there, and sitting in the corner were like the combination locks to the Krell lab. They looked like they hadn't been moved since 1956. They were just covered in dust and dirt. So I said, is this stuff for sale? Yeah, we'll sell you any of the stuff. I said, well, okay. So I started rounding up all the Forbidden Planet stuff. And I said, I kind of want the room. He said, well, 350,000, I can't
Wow.
afford it. No, $350.
Oh my gosh. That's a
So
deal. That's a Hollywood deal right there.
yeah, so I said, well, we'll be back tomorrow with a truck. I remember that night I was like sleepless. I was going, please don't burn down in the middle of the night or something. So anyway, yeah, my friend Bob Short, who is a big collector of Man from Uncle, and he wanted a bunch of stuff from Man from Uncle. So we rented it was like a 20-foot flatbed truck. We drove over there. And the only thing is they wouldn't let us load the stuff for union reasons. So we had to have like union guys come and load the stuff. But we
Of
picked
course.
out anything we wanted. And after that, the guy gave us a pass that we could go anywhere in the studio and look for props. And we were constantly getting stopped by the guards, and we'd hold up our pass and he'd go, well, have fun. So we went through, and like I found one of the miniature from the power plant, the one that's got the two globes on the ends, the things that goes up and down the power ventilating shaft. I found that in a bunch of grip equipment, and I had walked by it probably 4 or 5 times not knowing what it was because the globes were off of it and sitting in the corner. And the thing just looked like a winch when you walked by. And suddenly I saw the globe. Oh my God, this is the miniature from the Krell power plant. And so we loaded that up. And Bob Short, I think, spotted like the radar screen from the spaceship up in one of the rafters. And so it was just like kids in a candy store. We were just like grabbing everything we could get. And Jimmy McLennan, that was his name. And what a wonderful guy he was. In fact, he had worked on Forbidden Planet as a prop maker, and he was now the head of construction. And he took me like to the art department, said, "Give this guy whatever he wants," and because the studio was going to throw all this stuff out, so I had them run off a complete set of blueprints to the Crow Lab, and you know, all of this stuff. And he took me over to the actual prop department, which was different than construction, and talked to that guy. And he said, "Well, if there's stuff you want to get rid of from old stuff, let this guy have it." And I was able to get blueprints, and I got like the thing that the coffee maker was on, stuff like that. And yeah, it was just wonderful. And a box full of mostly broken handguns, ray guns, And
I'm not jealous at all. I was born too late. It's not fair.
well, it was just a classic case of being in the right place at the right time, because like I said, I missed
Yeah.
the bubble by a day. So we were very lucky that we got there on the day we did.
We'll come back to Robby in a second. I want to talk about how that came to you, and the fact that Robby the Robot has kind of become the de facto star of Forbidden Planet, even though there are actual actors in this movie. Forbidden Planet, which, oh my gosh, I got the 50th anniversary box set. I found this at one of the vintage malls here in LA, and it's got a little mini Robby the Robot in it. So, and I've been fortunate to see this at the TCM Classic Film Festival, where they had what they claimed was Robby the Robot. It might have been a replica, I don't know,
This
but it
one
was.
by the pool at the Roosevelt. Yeah, that was the original.
Oh, yay! Well, I
That
was
was actually
there,
the original
so I
Robby the
got.
Robot. Because yeah, I brought him down there, and it was scary because we had Robby walking by the pool, and I went, "Man, if that guy goes in, it's going to be bad."
That's so weird that you were there and I was there. We did not know each other at the time, but it all comes back to TCM. I love it. I mean, so the creation of this movie is really fascinating. The script started with Irving Block and Alan Adler. Block was in VFX. He had. It's the only script that he was really credited on. He mostly had story by credits for the rest of his career on stuff like Kronos and War of the Satellites and Atomic Submarine. Adler ended up dying young at 48 in 1964, and he wrote this and 1959's The Giant Behemoth. So the original progenitors of this script did not do a whole heck of a lot. Cyril Hume also did a pretty heavy rewrite from the research that I did. He was a very prolific screenwriter going back to 1924. He did Trader Horn. He did a lot of.
He was married to the girl from Dracula.
Oh, that's right. That's right. He was. He did a lot of Tarzan movies, Flying Down to Rio, Tokyo Joe, the original Ransom, which also had Leslie Nielsen in it. So, and from what I read, the Block and Adler script was set in Mercury in the year 1976, and it's a rescue mission for a father and daughter. There's no Krell, there's no id monster, there's nothing. Hume put in a lot of this, and supposedly there's a novelization that adds in a lot more backstory and a lot of other things that happen. But to watch this movie, it's always intriguing because it's also a take on The Tempest. It's essentially the story of this ship of, horny, thirsty men who show up on this planet, and Walter Pidgeon's clearly the Prospero. Robby the Robot would be the Ariel. The id monster is the Caliban. So you have a lot of real, like, Shakespearean influences in this movie. And I was reading Cyndy Hendershot's article From Trauma to Paranoia about 1950s cinema, and she talks about how the familiar mythological forms to represent the new threats present in the atomic age. So for her theory was that because of how all this stuff that was going on in the 1950s with regards to the bomb and, the consumerism and paranoia that we always get with 1950s films, that it was easier for a lot of films to mythologize them by taking them back to stuff like Shakespeare, to Greek myth, as a means of helping audiences deal with them, which I think is very interesting. I don't know if you saw any of that watching in the times that you've watched this, Bill.
I'm familiar with the Shakespeare plays and stuff, but I didn't. I don't know that they had that in mind. I do know that Irving Bloch was very much interested in mythology, and certainly that would have been something that he would have stuck in there. Whether or not he actually had in mind, Shakespeare when he was coming up with it, I couldn't say. But I actually used to live in Studio City where I lived, and I actually found his number in a phone book, and I called him up. He did not want to talk about Forbidden Planet at all. So
Aww.
yeah, and it was very sad for him because I could have chatted him up, and it would have been great to have heard his stories and stuff. But he did a lot. His influence actually is more than people think because he did a lot of pre-production drawings and paintings, which influenced the way the film looked. And he didn't get a lot of credit for that. But if you go online, you can actually find paintings that he did of the Krell power plant and all that stuff, and the Krell lab, and he had a big influence on the way the film wound up looking.
Do you think that he had antipathy because the script was rewritten, or why do you think he didn't care for the film?
I think that he felt that he wasn't given enough credit for what he had done. And it's probably correct. I mean, he really was. And Cyril Hume, I think he's an amazing writer and did a great job with so I think it's really the both of them together. In a way, it's kind of like the Beatles, where you had John Lennon and Paul McCartney, and they
Right.
sort of played off of each other, even though they had different ideas about what was going on. When they come together, that's the the finish is greater than the sum of the parts, as they say.
I think a lot of people don't get credit for this movie. I mean, Forbidden Planet has kind of become a punchline, of course, the Rocky Horror Picture Show putting it in the opening song. It's like a lot of 1950s sci-fi, I think, has been unfairly maligned as this silly.
I don't think so, because I think recently, if you go online, it's getting a lot of love, and
I love that.
and it's actually was recently voted by critics and fans as the greatest science fiction film ever made. And
I'm so happy to hear that.
if you think about it, it really is. I mean, it influenced Star Trek. Wouldn't have been Star Trek without Forbidden Planet, and the ideas in Forbidden Planet. People always bring up 2001 as the greatest science fiction film, but actually Forbidden Planet's a better film. It's not
It is.
made better because it didn't have the budget and it didn't have Stanley Kubrick. But if you think about the ideas in it, the ideas far surpass anything in 2001. Because 2001 is a fairly basic story, whereas Forbidden Planet's got all the backstory with the Krell and the Freudian things. And it's an amazing story. It really is.
I think it's also more accessible for audiences too. 2001 is such an esoteric, cerebral type of movie. I mean, I've shown it to people, young people especially, and they're just like, I'm not into this. And then you show them something like Forbidden Planet, which is very colorful, it's very zingy, it moves very quickly. And I think there is that, I mean, of course, that old school Cyril Hume working on Tarzan films, I think that serialized quality to it that just kind of leaps off the page and makes it more accessible, even though it's presenting this weird futuristic landscape that is so far afield from what the actual future is starting to look like.
Yeah, well, Cyril Hume, to his credit, spent a lot of time at Caltech researching
I
the
didn't know
science.
that.
Yeah, and all that stuff, all that technical stuff came from Caltech. That wasn't something that he made up. So it was like, he wanted to make sure. That's like, I mean, there's things that go unnoticed in that film, like, when they're in the deceleration chambers. Why is it red, blue, and green and all that stuff? Because it's going through the light. It's passing below light speed. And so you're dropping between no light at all to like, all these various colors, which is kind of a really fun idea.
I love that. And, Fred Wilcox, the director, he had started out as a second unit director in the 1930s. He had previously directed stuff, worked on Lassie Come Home. He did a couple Lassie films, Three Daring Daughters. He did the 1940 adaptation of The Secret Garden with Mark O'Brien.
Which is a great movie, by the way.
It's a great movie. I love that movie. And he did one film after this, which is 1960's I Passed for White, which is all in the title. You know everything you need to know. And he also died very young in 1964 at the age of 58. And I think that I can't stress how perfectly this encapsulates both the 1950s and what people love about the old Hollywood aesthetic. It is that craftsmanship. It's the fact that they filmed this all indoors on the MGM lot in Culver City, and that starship prop that they have when they're working on the UFO once they land on Altair 4, that is surrounded by what they called a cyclorama, which is just a big painted background that just kind of like turns around the whole thing. You don't get that anymore. Now it's just like a bunch of dudes, looking at a computer and they're CGIing everything, to put you in that space.
You'd be hard pressed to find a place where you could shoot that today, because when they did the saucer landing sequence, that was done on Lot 3, and they used the big cyc that they had, which was enormous. And they actually shot it in daylight, which is why it looks so good, because you could see the actual shadow of the saucer and everything. And that was shot outdoors. And the saucer is like 7 feet across. It looks really good. And yeah, I mean, I think you'd be hard pressed to do that today. And it would never look quite as good as that.
No, and I think that that's also what makes Forbidden Planet so spectacular. Everything looks good. Everything looks, the money's on screen, right? I think they said the budget was about 1.9 mil. And it looks so flawless. They go into Morbius, that's Walter Pidgeon's character, his house. It's this futuristic, mid-century modern type layout. Alta, the Anne Francis character, she's swathed in Helen Rose designed outfits, which they banned the movie in Spain because her skirts were so short in the movie. All of that is just the mark of quality that you get from the studio system.
Well, at that point, that was sort of at the end of MGM's grandeur, but they had at that point in their history, they had these basically giant machine to make movies that had like the best guys working that they could get. I mean, a lot of the prop builders on that film were hired away from Lockheed. MGM would routinely go over to Lockheed and pay them more money. So these guys who were doing aerospace stuff were working on Forbidden Planet.
Well, and they also utilized Disney for some of the animation too on the It monsters. So you're seeing a lot of real cross collaboration here. That again, I don't think we see now with the more modern filmmaking machine as it is.
Yeah, well, back then you had filmmakers running the studios. Now it's all MBAs, and when you had that kind of thing, they go, okay, we'll lend you this guy or that guy, and you lend us this guy, and that's the way it worked. And I don't think that would happen. Well, first of all, they don't have anybody on staff anymore. Everyone's you just grab who you can. But they had staffers that were like the best in the business. Like you said, the wardrobe people and the prop makers and scenic artists, and yeah, I mean, it was just the best that you could get.
Yeah, the Helen Rose costumes, I cannot stress. Anne Francis's costumes in this are fantastic. And you could probably pull them off today. You can't always say that with every classic film, but she's got an outfit in this movie that is it looks like a nude bodysuit, but it's got little diamonds and stuff all over it. That I maintain, my hot take is that they utilized that as inspiration for the Britney Spears sparkly bodysuit in the Toxic music video. Look it up. They look the same. That's my theory, at least.
I believe you. I'm not familiar with that, but I will definitely check it out.
I'll send you the side-by-side pictures. I think they're the same. But this really also was a mix of MGM, like you were saying, kind of the fact that there was the studio element. You're getting both the ingrained studio history in the casting with the up and coming, because Walter Pidgeon had been a star since the 1940s, and he was in a bit of transition after this. He's slowly, I think he was about 59 when this movie came out. He kept working, up until I think like the 1970s, but he was not the leading man anymore. He started to have to kind of take what he could get, and for Forbidden Planet was not by far not the nadir of his career, but he slowly transitioned into more elder statesman roles. Did some TV. Was in the 1965 Rodgers and Hammerstein Cinderella, which is how I first saw him. And he's really good. He is giving the gravitas that you need from an older actor. And his. I think what is fun to watch is watching him be this character that does not know he's a villain, and yet even when he's supposed to be, when they realize that the id monster is coming from him, it's this other half of his persona, and that he's unintentionally killed everybody on the preceding ship. You still feel for him, you still root for him, like any good conflicted hero, which I love watching him make those acting choices in this part.
He was a great accomplished actor, certainly by
Oh
that
yeah.
time. It was certainly not one of his favorite roles. I know that he was not that happy with it. I think he was happier with it once he saw the finished product. But I think when they were making it, his attitude was, "I'm making a space movie, and they got a robot and all this stuff." But I understand that later on he understood what it was that they were making. So yeah, I mean, yeah, you had some really good people there. One of the things too that people often forget is the contribution of Louis and B.B. Barron, because this is the first time you had a completely electronic score in a film, and that was like really a dangerous thing to be doing back in 1956. And even today, you don't hear that. No, you have never heard another
No.
score anything like that. And in fact, a lot of those sounds you can't get. People go, "I'll do that on my synth." No, you won't. You will not.
What do you know what they were using on that score, or how they were
Yeah.
accomplishing some of those things?
Yeah, I became actually really good friends with BB Barron. We'd go to lunch quite often, and she had me over to dinner and stuff, and we talked about it a lot. And what Louis would do, Louis was sort of the way worked out is Louis was sort of the electronics guy. He was the guy who built all the circuits and stuff, and they would make specific circuits to make certain sounds. And what he would do is he'd like, overdrive them with too much power, or he'd stick a screwdriver in there and short it out. And those were the sounds that these circuits were making basically when they were dying. And then they'd record it on, in those days, tape, and they were able to manipulate, speed it up, slow it down, do feedback, and so forth. So you can't really recreate that stuff unless you make it the same way he did. And I think they could have recreated it, because a lot of that stuff was just one-offs, and when they got it, they got it. But yeah, it's an amazing score. And you got to give a lot of credit to Dory Sherry, who was running the studio at the time,
Yeah.
for having the bravery to stick that kind of score on a film.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, to go back to the acting, everything I think is just, it's so perfectly suited to this part. Anne Francis is, I think, one of the most beautiful actresses of the. She had been working since 1947. And in 1954, she finally starts getting, I would argue, parts that are worthy of her. She had done Bad Day at Black Rock in 1955, which
Which is
is
cool. Yeah, she's
another
great in
perfect movie.
that.
She's so great in that. That movie's great. She had played the girlfriend in Susan Slept Here, which you can listen to our episode we did at Christmas time about that weird movie. And here, I think it could very well be a quote unquote girl part. She's the girl. All the guys show up, and she doesn't know anything. She's the dumb baby in the woods that they're all trying to like make out with her and whatnot. But I think what makes her acting talent shine is that she does have a tenacity in her. She's not just the innocent. She's certainly not the dumb blonde, which I really appreciated. She has this ability to commune with animals and everything. And she has really a good back and forth with Leslie Nielsen, who incredibly prolific actor, had done several things, would do even more things after this movie. If anything, I think Leslie is a bit more one note than Anne Francis is in this film.
Well, that was like, I think, his second acting role, I believe, because I think before that he was in Tammy and the Bachelor or
He
something like that.
he
And,
did
and
Tammy and the Bachelor, and then he had also done the original Ransom. I think
okay, all right.
two or
Yeah, so, but I think he called it his Donald Duck era. But when Quack, he said Quack is lying. But I think he's really quite good in it. And, it's amazing when you see him later on because he's so known now as a comedy actor. But yeah, I think he's quite good in it. And it had a really good cast. I mean, the film, yeah. Interesting. Anne Francis, I don't know if you know that. She was in Picture of Jenny. Is that the name of the movie? Portrait of Jenny?
Portrait of Jenny.
Yeah, the one with Joseph Cotton. She's actually
Yeah,
one of
Jennifer
the
Jones.
teenagers. She's one of the teenagers that shows up at the end of the movie to look at the painting.
Watch that. No, yeah, that's
Yeah,
so
she's
cool.
not
I did not
credited.
know that.
Yeah, she's not
I
credited,
mean,
but
that makes sense.
yeah.
But regardless
I'll
of
tell you
all
something
the
interesting. I was just going to tell you something. I became close friends with Richard Anderson too, and we talked a lot about Forbidden Planet. And one thing he told me was, and I didn't realize, one of the first movies that he didn't work on it, but the studio would make you, if you were a young actor, they would make you go and sit in on sets. So you'd have to just be there. It was like your job. And the first movie that he sat in on was Picture of Dorian Gray. And so he was there during the entire
ugh,
production, just sitting on the side. And that was how they would have actors learn about what was expected of them on the set and so forth, which was kind of interesting.
so cool. That's so cool. I know Ed Begley Jr. talks a lot about being a kid and sitting on sets at that time and getting to see. And again, I'm just like, I'm not jealous at all that I was born way too late to get to hang out on those sets. But I think the biggest star of them all ends up being Robby the Robot. We come back to him. He's on the poster carrying a scantily clad woman, which is not a scene that happens in the movie, but that's how they sell him. And, it really is a testament to. There's several people credited with his creation, but I'm always fascinated by Robert Kinoshita, who was the mechanical designer. He was a Japanese internment survivor, never credited for the work he did on Robby the Robot. Also designed the robot for Lost in Space, which is similar. And from what I read, and Bill, feel free to jump in and correct if there's anything I got wrong, but they say that it cost about $100,000 to $125,000, which is about $1 million in today's money, to create him, which made him at the time the most expensive single prop created for the movie, and it was 7% of the budget of the entire film.
Yeah, that's correct, actually. Uh, Robbie was that's why nowadays, if you were going to make a film like that, you would have two or three of them just in case something went wrong. Well, they couldn't afford that, so there was only one Robbie. So, that's why there's a scene, what's his name? Frankie Darro is often credited as being in
Yeah.
Robbie. He was actually only in the opening scene when Robbie comes out of the car because at that point he had been drinking too much and he started to go over and about five or six prop guys went and ran
Oh,
and grabbed him before he fell over, because that would have severely damaged production. So, But they fired him after that, and they got a guy named Frankie Carpenter who came in, who was he had already been. They had him waiting in the wings anyway because they thought maybe it would be too much for one actor to do. But he came in, and he was like an ex-Marine, and he was able to do it. And he was very happy to be in Robby, and he was very proud of his work. I talked with him not too long ago, and uh, yeah, he would. So that's really what happened. But talking about Robby for a second, first of all, I think it's an oversimplification just to give all the credit to Bob Kinoshita. Although, he's the guy who sort of took all the ideas and stuck them together and made one cohesive design. And but there were a lot of other people involved. There was Arnold Gillespie and Arthur Lonergan and a bunch of other people who contributed to the way he looked. And but yeah, if you think about Robby, Forbidden Planet, and let's put it this way: had they used like one of those tin can robots from like the serials in the 1930s, Forbidden Planet just wouldn't have worked. Robby was like the key prop in that film. That if Robby wasn't cool and didn't work, that movie would have been junk. It wouldn't have. People would have laughed. It just had to be the coolest
he gets a
movie
lot
ever
of
saw.
credit for being the end of the tin can type of robot. I know a lot of people compare it. There's before Robby and after, and I think a lot of people say before is Gort, the robot from The Day the Earth Stood Still, which is very much kind of this lumbering type of character. You don't integrate him into the plot. Whereas Robby is very much integral to the plot, and I think it's funny that there was, in doing the research that I did, there was a lot of talk about kind of how the movie plays with technology, and how it utilizes Robby. So, I know Robert Torry writes in his work Apocalypse Then about how, Forbidden Planet is really a story about how the human mind, still enmeshed in primitive, unconscious impulses and aggressions, leads to the destruction of an entire world. Yet, Robby is this blending of humans embracing their own irrelevance, which I think is very relevant to today. We live in this world where we're talking about AI and using technology to replace human, and Robby is really kind of on the threshold of that. They call him like a mother. He's supposed to be the character that is so tied into helping Alta and make her clothes. He makes all these things. He very much is a mother figure juggling all these different domestic roles. At the same time, he's also doing all the paternal things of helping bring in things to craft, help them rebuild their communication equipment. So he's really interesting in how he's utilized, because I think it is different from how other robots in films were utilized. Even after this, I don't think we utilize robots in the same way in sci-fi films the way we use Robby the Robot.
Yeah. No, it's a good
How
point.
did Robby the Robot come into your life? How did that happen?
Well, as I think I mentioned, I was interested in Robby back at the time of the MGM auction, and I sort of kept track of what happened to him. And I think it was about 1970? No, it was probably 1975 or 76. I told Rob a place called Movie World, which was a place that was like a museum, and they had like a bunch of props and stuff. So I used to go down there and see Robby. Actually, no, that was around 19. Well, when was it? Yeah, so in the early 70s, 73 or 74, I guess. Anyway, so I went down there and saw Robby, and then I became enamored with him and decided that I was going to build one. Which I knew nothing about building stuff, about particularly
Why not
plastics and
try to just build a robot?
exactly, and nothing about plastics and machining, and you know. But I did, and then I went to work by building the replica. I went to work for Don Post Studios, and then later. Um, Somewhere around, it was around 1979, I think, I heard that the movie world was going out of business and they were selling everything. And a guy called me up and said, "You better get your ass down there. They're going to sell Robby." So I went down there and made a deal. And yeah, bought them. Actually, at the time, I didn't really want the car because I didn't know what I would do with it. But they said, you take the robot, you take the car. So I said, okay. So, but I got Robby. He was in, he definitely needed some help at that point. He had been on display. People had picked stuff off of him. And I was lucky enough that when I got Robby, which I didn't know, they had these shipping cases, or basically stage cases, that they would have rolled Robby around on at MGM. And there was a big drawer in the bottom that had all these brand new parts that I guess the studio figured, well, you might need these someday. So I was able to use most of that to do my restoration. So I tried as much as possible to do a museum restoration where you just use original stuff and original materials and did it the same way they did it and so forth. And I was able to basically bring them back to life and make them usable again. And I think one of the first things you would have seen him in the original, because he hadn't been in anything. The original hadn't been in anything since I think Lost in Space, and as a guest robot. And then I used him in what was the Joe Dante movie, Gremlins.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
and so he had also done, I think, like 3 episodes of Twilight Zone in the 1950s as well. Um,
yeah, they used the MGM. Yeah, MGM would rent him out all the time. Back in the '50s, and like he was in The Thin Man, and I think the Gale Storm show, and you know, Lost in Space and Twilight Zone. He actually had quite a career. My first wife was an actress, and she was always upset that Robby got more work than she did.
oh my god! And you kept Robbie until fairly recently, right? I think it broke a record when it went up for auction as the most highest price for a prop, I think, in like auction history at the time.
That was in 27 end of 2017. Yeah. Um, well, I'd had him for like half my life, or actually more than half my life, and I thought, well, I was getting to a point where I didn't want to, like, if something happened to me, I didn't want it to fall on my wife or my daughter or something to have to deal with, what to do with them. So I thought it was best that I found a good home for him while it was good. So
Exactly. Well, we talked about seeing the robot at the pool. I mean, talk a little bit about how, so from what I'd read online, an actor being in the suit, it was legs and then chest and then there's the helmet. So there's a lot of moving parts and there's servos and a lot of like electrical whiz bang in the top. And Frankie Darro, I think they said, was only like 5'3", so you need a shorty in there. How did that all operate for something
well,
like
yeah.
TCM?
Well, the issue really is you need somebody who doesn't really fit any kind of normal human stature. You need somebody who's short and skinny and very strong. So,
I mean, I'm sure there's countless people out there.
yeah. So, yeah, because he would look out where the mouth was. They'd paint his face black so the lights you wouldn't see it. But Robby, in a way, is a robot in the sense that he had a lot of mechanisms in there and stuff. And the suit is not light. It's a heavy suit, and it's very difficult to see the horizon. So you have to be very careful. Yeah, I mean, you can kind of see actually Frankie Carpenter was really a better operator than Frankie Darro. Frankie Darro, when you watch Robby first show up and get out of the car, he's kind of moving kind of slow. But the rest of the movie, he's moving pretty fluidly, and that was because of Frankie Carpenter. And yeah, he was much stronger and more
So
agile.
we're not unfortunately putting Ben Mankiewicz in the Robbie the Robot suit back at the Roosevelt, is what I'm hearing. So
No, he was not in there. Actually, a friend of mine named Robert Parigi was actually in the suit, as I was there making sure that everything worked and suited him up.
and nobody ended up in the pool, which is
Exactly.
always a
Yeah.
good thing.
Well, especially when you have neon circuits that are working with like 15,000 volts, you don't want somebody getting in the pool with the wet.
Exactly. Well, as we start to come to the end of this, I wanted to touch base on the Oscars because this was nominated. It got one Oscar nomination for its VFX, and it lost that one nomination to The Ten Commandments. And spoiler alert, there were only two nominees. So it was that and The Ten Commandments. It was a 50-50 chance, and The Ten Commandments won. I have not seen The Ten Commandments because it's too long and that's just way too much Charlton Heston for me. But I have a hard time believing that the parting of the Red Seas is cooler than Robby the Robot. That's just my hot take.
I have to go back and look at. I'm not sure that that was the contender. It might have been Tom Thumb, but it was definitely somebody. Yeah, it's like
No.
maybe.
According to IMDb, it was between that and Ten Commandments, and Ten
Okay,
Commandments
well,
won.
there you
So
are. But yeah, I mean, look.
Tom Thumb. I mean, that would have made some sense. Okay, Tiny Russ Tamblyn. I could maybe understand that. I don't know. Maybe I've been raised on Universal Studios tour and seeing what the parting of the Red Seas actually looks like on the tour. And it's just I don't know. It doesn't whelm me. Robbie the Robot, I think, is way cooler in my opinion. Do
Oh well,
not
I mean,
listeners send
look,
me.
Forbidden Planet had groundbreaking effects. It absolutely should have won, and Louis and B.B. Barron should have won an Academy Award for the score because it was ever nothing like it ever. And since they still should, they should get a posthumous Academy Award. Oh, the Academy, that's another story.
Exactly. Yes. Listeners, do not send me your emails about actually Ten Commandments is cool. No, do not send them. I mean, overall, I think Forbidden Planet is a lot of fun. It looks fantastic. I've been fortunate to see it on a big screen. I've been fortunate to see it on a small screen, and it still hits every single time. I think it is the perfect encapsulation of the 50s sci-fi landscape,
I think it's
and
actually,
I
yeah,
really enjoy it.
I think I'll take it one step further. I think it's the perfect encapsulation of the 50s. It's got all of the
I would
50s
agree with
themes in
you.
it. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, look, I have to say, I think that since Robbie sold, I think it brought a lot of attention to the film. And people are going, wait a minute, what was this from? And it's now, like I say, it's now getting its own due, and it's about time.
I love it. Bill, it's always great to nerd out with you about stuff like this. I appreciate you so much popping on to talk with me. Where can fans find you online? How can they interact with you? Anything you have coming up that they should know about?
Well, I'm on YouTube. I have a channel called Undertaking Cinema, which is undertaking like with shovel and pick. And I will be at Monster Palooza in about 2 months, which is coming up in Pasadena, and I will have a display there showing a lot of my stuff, and yeah, and we're going to have some merch there. So if you are in the area, please come and say hello, and love to talk to you about movies, horror, Forbidden Planet, whatever.
Exactly. And listeners, you can email me at ticklishbiz@gmail.com or contact us old school or new school, excuse me, on social media. We're at ticklishbiz, unless it is Twitter, where we are at ticklish_biz. The podcast is on all podcast apps. We would love a review. We haven't gotten one, I think, this year. So drop us one. You can also watch us on YouTube at youtube.com/at ticklish business. And you can always find me online at Kristen K. Lopez, unless it's Instagram, where I am at Kristen Lopez 88. And you can find my writing over at my newsletter, The Film Maven, at The Film Maven, that's 2Ms.com. And I have books. I have so many books coming out. You should definitely buy them. My book, Popcorn Disabilities, came out in November. You can buy that now. And my next book is But Have You Read the Book? Volume 2. It's romance. So I talk about everything from The Sheik to Bridges of Madison County. Those are two very weird books. You can pre-order that for publication on July 28th through the Hache Running Press website. I'll have that in the show notes along with all the other stuff that ends up in the show notes. That's going to close us out. Thank you so much to all of our patrons, again, who continue to support us. Sean Goudreau, Richard Silver, Peter Blitzstein, Jacob Howler, David Floyd. There's so many of you. Head over to patreon.com/ticklishbiz to learn more about being a supporter of the podcast and classic film as we celebrate our 10th anniversary. Yes, I've been doing this podcast for 10 years. and I'm not feeling a way about it at all. We will be back with a new episode soon. Till then.